Hey, y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Texas SignalCast. I'm your host, Joe Desotel, and I'm here with Jessica Montoya Coggins,
Hey guys.
our co-host, and we are talking Texas politics. A lot going on today, actually. I think there's a lot of breaking news that's going on literally as we sit here and record. I think the hottest news of the day, Jessica, is the Texas Elections Committee hearing the HB6 bill. It's essentially like a laundry list of voter suppression policy changes Republicans have been wanting to push. Did you have any chance to watch some of the hearing?
Yes. And it did seem I'm going to try and keep this PG-13.
Yeah.
So it did seem like a horror show. And a lot of that had to do, I believe, with Representative Briscoe Cain, who heads up that committee. I have to be honest, before I arrived at the Texas Signal and, knew a lot about these representatives, when I came across Briscoe Cain, I kind of refused to believe that was a real person. But now that I know that it indeed is, and I am kind of not surprised that he was just completely unprepared for this. I know you seem to know the rules a lot more about what happened. Because I think he did something procedurally where he wasn't supposed to do. So what happened?
Right. I mean, there really is a lot to unpack. I mean, starting with the fact that, yes, Briscoe Cain is like a caricature of what you would think of as like these kind of right-wing Republican in Texas, like cowboy hat and boots and the whole thing. But he looks like he's in a costume when he does it. And it's like, oh, and, and I'm not trying to make fun of his appearance or anything, but he's a caricature. And so he's been put at the charge. He's the chair of the elections committee. And this is actually his bill. So he essentially can't preside over the hearing of the bill as chair because it's his bill. So the vice chair, who's a Democrat, basically was taking testimony, and there were hundreds of people that were signed up to testify, come from all over the state of Texas, and notable folks too, like Beto, were there to testify against this bill. And essentially, Nicole Collier, who is the chair of the Black Caucus of the state legislators, and she was going up to have some of her questions answered about the bill. And it appeared that the chair, Briscoe Cain, did not want her to be able to ask her questions or give her time, and essentially tried to stop the meeting from happening and call a recess. But because he did not set a time for them to come back and reconvene, that was a point of order. It's considered a lethal point of order. So the bill itself would die if they tried to continue that hearing. So what they have to do is reschedule the hearing for another day. So they're going to have to come back. So it's like the biggest enemy is incompetence. I mean, it's like all we can do is like say how bad this bill is and try to vote against it. But it's really them that are really slowing down the process.
Yeah, and I mean, as you said, hundreds of people had signed up, traveled all over the state to come. And again, they're also putting their health at risk too, because a lot of the COVID-19 protocols are not being followed in the state capitol. So, I saw these images of people in hazmat suits, and that really isn't theatrics. Like you kind of, and there were several photos of the hearing room. Many people were not wearing masks. The social distancing is pretty impossible there. So, people were really, making a huge effort and a sacrifice to go down. And now, this entire hearing was just delayed until who knows when.
Yeah, who knows when? I mean, I think the only solace is that it brings more awareness. I mean, Briscoe Cain was trending on Twitter, just for how foolish it was, and
never a good thing to trend on Twitter.
I mean, it's really not, especially if you're a Texas politician, especially I'd say, and so that brought a lot of light to this, I think, nationally, and the fact that there's a delay will just give us more time to organize and let people know how bad this really is and what's happening. The other thing is that the Senate version of this bill is going to be heard tomorrow on Friday. And so those folks who came into town will probably also be signed up to speak against that bill. and certainly have that opportunity, assuming they don't do something, ridiculous and end up delaying that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's been rescheduled at this point, the House hearing. But I know we covered on TexasSignal.com that Move Texas was doing a very large media campaign, digital advertising campaign to essentially let folks in Texas know that Greg Abbott is supporting these voter suppression bills, and they're going on right now, and that legislators really need to hear from constituents. So, hopefully this just gives us more time to organize against something like this. Speaking of Greg Abbott, I mean, there's so many different things like it seems like he's doing now to kind of distract from, one thing after another. And it almost starts to feel like the whole Trump thing where it's just like, there's so much coming. It's really hard to kind of focus on any one scandal. And that's actually kind of new for Greg Abbott. I think he's been pretty tough line and pretty able to kind of stay above, any attacks, really partisan attacks at all. But it seems like
I think ever since the storm in February, when there was that huge disaster, that really seemed to usher in a new era for Abbott, where as you were saying, he usually has this calm as a cucumber type of demeanor, and always seems to just be above things. And that, I think, for the first time, really rattled him. And as you said, like, he has not necessarily been the even keel governor that we had seen him to be.
Yeah. I mean, and so he's obviously supporting these bills, but Ken Paxton, our Attorney General, of course, we always have to do the Ken Paxton update. What's latest with him? Well, I mean, here he is again. He was one of the chief folks pushing these conspiracies through all the way to the Supreme Court. And then you have today the arguments being made by Briscoe Cain and these other folks is about voter integrity and having people feel confident in the elections, even though they spent the last year tearing that confidence completely to shreds. But Ken Paxton is in the news again, specifically because there have been open records requests for his text messages and emails as it relates to his trip on January 6th. When he was and spoke at that Trump rally. So apparently he's refusing to release any of this and saying that it was personal and it was a private trip. I mean, if that's not bad enough, it is his office who actually determines whether an open records request is enforceable or not, essentially. And so he's decided that his emails and text messages are not open to the public. I mean, it's just the abuse of power is just like so blatant and awful.
Yeah, I feel like we talk about this almost every week. Ken Paxton has used this office as his own, personal piggy bank, basically. And, things, the rule of law doesn't seem to apply to him. And, again, you brought up that he went to Washington, D.C. And my understanding was he very much was representing Texas as a part of that, saying that he was the Texas Attorney General.
Absolutely.
He's still, I think, very proud of that Supreme Court case that he brought forward, which, again, was probably one of the stupidest and most, again, my apologies to Sonia Sotomayor having to read that. Dribble.
Yeah.
It's offensive. But yeah, it was offensive and embarrassing and a waste of our tax dollars. I mean, to literally just say oh, you have to throw out the votes of, Michigan, Wisconsin, and I think it was Arizona, or might have been Georgia. I can't remember. Yeah, 4 of these swing states. And, imagine if an attorney general from, Michigan tried to do that for Texas, I would think Ken Paxton would have a different reaction to that. But no, I mean, this is so this was also a project with the Dallas Morning News, I think the Austin American Statesman, ProPublica, Houston Chronicle, and maybe the Texas Tribune, where they really have banded together to try and get these records of what Paxton was communicating. So, we'll see how that effort goes. But, this is a person who really he just thinks the law, he is truly above the law, I guess, in his mind.
I mean, and it's Republican votes too, like that they're trying to throw out. It's not even just Democrat. I mean, they're going to throw out just indiscriminately people's, after they should be so embarrassed after the 22,000 hours they spent looking for voter fraud to be going through all these motions. And it just really, encapsulated today when the chair basically screwed the bill up by trying to cut off the chair of the Black Caucus, who wanted to just ask some questions about how the bill might affect people of color. And it's just unbelievable how perfect that encapsulates what they're actually trying to do.
And even for the cases of voter fraud, which are very minimal. So I think over the course of like 5 years, and I believe it was the Tribune who had a story about this, the cases are predominantly people of color. And they are, they tend to be just sort of honest mistakes that people will make, either incorrect address. There's a very famous case about Crystal Mason up in my neck of the woods, who she just truly thought she was able to vote, and she was not. And they really threw the book at her.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was like a 5-year sentence.
Yeah.
That is more than
it's awful.
It's awful. I mean, there are people who murder people who will face less time than that. But that is just basically what they have. And, you think about the last 2 years, how many Texans have died or been impacted by, like, say, gun violence. But is that something that our legislature is working on? No. Instead, you're going to have like these voter, quote unquote, we have to tamp down on voter fraud, even though it's so minuscule.
Yeah, well, in fact, they go the other way. They say, mass shootings. Well, we need to make sure that we do everything to ensure these people can get their hands on any type of firearm.
Or that teachers should be armed.
Yeah. We'll leave it up to the teachers. I mean, it's unbelievable. But back to Paxton, there's someone who, you talked to Joe Jaworski, former mayor of Galveston, who's running for that. And then there was another prominent attorney announced on the Democratic side, Lee Merritt, a prominent Dallas attorney. And you've probably heard of him. And he's represented very high profile cases such as Botham Jean and Ahmaud Arbery, which are both national stories. And so
he also had a client who passed away in a McKinney jail just recently, and he was representing the family, and that actually prompted, I think, his running for office. So he released kind of a video with his dog, a very cute friend there. But I believe he's going to have a larger announcement later this week, and we are actually working to talk with him in an interview for Texas Signal. So be on the lookout for that. And we'll I imagine there'll be more candidates who opt to run for Attorney General. I think this is actually a national race at this point.
Yeah,
a lot of people around the country would maybe like to see Texas have a different Attorney General.
I think so. I think, if you're a voter in Pennsylvania or any of these other 8 states, you have a vested interest in the Texas Attorney General, not trying to overturn your vote, take it away at the Supreme Court. It's interesting because Democrats, we always talk about, how they're going to like field candidates for all these open positions. And then, of course, sometimes, we make this bracket like we did. And like, of course, Lee Merritt's name didn't come up. We are talking about a different office. But it's just really cool how, we can kind of see like who we think are rising stars. And then all of a sudden somebody kind of comes out of what seems like out of nowhere and says, I want to do it. And then you kind of read their story and you're like, okay, yeah, you'd make a really good candidate. And so I think in his case, that's, he's not served in any previous office before that I'm aware of or anything like that. But another name actually of somebody who has that's come up for governor. I don't know if you saw this, but former Speaker Joe Straus basically said that he is not ruled out running for statewide office in 2022 in Texas. And it's kind of it's a conversation Democrats have had in the past about, would he make a crossover candidate? And then he announced in this interview with with the Texas Tribune that he had actually voted for Joe Biden. So I don't know if he had seen that, but
yeah, I mean, I think he's like a lot of Republicans in Texas who, maybe feel a little alienated by their party currently. I talk with a former representative. I'll keep his name clear just because I'm not sure he totally wants people to know that he voted for Joe Biden. But you sort of look at what the present day Republican Party is doing in Texas, and I don't necessarily think that they believe in that. In addition to the monstrosity voter bill that they have, on Friday morning they're going to hear Senate testimony about a sort of anti-trans sports ban for children. What purpose does that serve? It's just cruel. You've got all of the ridiculous anti-choice legislation that they're pushing. So at some point, for many Republicans, I have to imagine that this is not the party that they necessarily signed up for.
I mean, I think they'd much rather honestly not even be talking about like those kinds of issues. They'd rather not actually have those conversations. I think many of them would really just rather not at all.
I think also on the voting side, a lot of these absentee voting bills were actually like brought by Republicans. They kind of wanted to have those, and I think so. And restricting voting rights. When you think about it, if your party is sort of centered on getting less people to vote, what does that sort of say about your party?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. They see their path as reducing the number of people who are voting in these large counties, as the Democrats see our path as expanding our organizing. And I speak as a Democrat personally when I say that, but expanding outreach and organizing to places where we haven't been before, and places where we just need to do better. In South Texas, we talk about it a lot. And that's one of the things. I know you had a conversation recently, and you wrote a story about it, this report about South Texas and how we can do a better job of reaching that community.
Yeah. I talked with an organization called Cambio, Texas. They're progressive. Their goal is to increase voter turnout in the Rio Grande Valley and to field candidates that reflect those values. So they had a post-election report, and it was actually very, very interesting. Right after 2020, there were all these stories about the Rio Grande Valley, and like, what happened to the Democrats, and why was Donald Trump so popular? And they were kind of filed by national reporters who maybe didn't quite know the area so much. I remember reading about Zapata County so much. Zapata County is actually not in the Rio Grande Valley; it's just north of it, and it is quite tiny. But Trump did win and became the first Republican since Reconstruction to do so. But so this post-election report, really looked at and talked with that. I think that was the most important part. They talked with elected officials, consultants, people that were on the ground, and the actual voters. And so this was sort of the culmination of a lot of backbreaking work, to figure out what happened. And there's, I think, a lot, for Democrats to take. I think one of their big points was that Donald Trump just himself was a popular figure for many people in the Rio Grande Valley. And I don't necessarily think that is going to be replicated by just any old Republican. There was a lot about his personality, the fact that he was a businessman. That phrase came up a lot with a lot of voters, that they were just inherently popular. And, when you look at the two most populous counties in the RGV, Hidalgo and Cameron, Joe Biden actually, improved upon Hillary Clinton's numbers. However, there was just a larger vote share that Donald Trump captured. And so take a look at that article. There was also a lot to say about working within the community. National campaigns tend to not work so much with local vendors. There was actually a really interesting anecdote in the report about a local vendor in the RGV, a lifelong Democrat who did vote for Biden, but he loved the Trump trains, and he was able to sell all this merchandise, like these little flags every weekend.
I mean, hey, he's an entrepreneur,
Yeah, and so so there's things I think that as a party, we can start to think about, how are we actually engaging in these communities? But yeah, as you say, like there's always ways in which we can improve. And it's, I think, a good thing to sort of look back at what happened and figure out what we can now do in 2021 as we prepare for 2022.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just can't imagine saying, well, they didn't vote for us. Let's just figure out a way to like make sure they can't vote. Like it's so wild that they just so brazenly do that. But so, the border has actually been, coming up a lot lately since Joe Biden has been president. Of course, a lot of the same issues and same happenings have been going on, migrants and unaccompanied minors. And so that has been a big issue since Biden has been on. They've refound that issue again. I think I saw Ted Cruz is headed down to the border with some other senators. Do you know anything about what's going on down there or what they're trying to accomplish?
Well, essentially, a lot of I guess, on the national media side, there's been this push to call this a crisis or, a conundrum, however you see it. But this sort of quote unquote surge of migrants has actually been happening pretty much before Biden ever took office, even before the election. So around October, there was just sort of an influx, and which is, by the way, actually considerably down from what it was in the early 2000s. So if you just want to keep a little bit of perspective in that frame. But, for the Biden administration, they did inherit like a very, very broken system that was intentionally broken. You remember a lot of the immigration policies that were inputted by the Trump administration, also spearheaded by Chad Wolf, a Texan who kind of illegally took over Homeland Security. But
it was just a disincentive campaign to make it as cruel as possible, make the conditions as harsh as possible. So they essentially spread the word to say, stop coming.
And I mean, to separate children from their parents, like that's just an inherently cruel thing. And I think actually even the majority of Americans agree with that, even Republicans. But so right now, yes, so Cruz, Cornyn are leading a delegation of Republican senators. So they'll be in Texas over the weekend. This has been a huge thing for both of them, to blast the Biden administration. Abbott has also been very vocal about this. Pretty much every Republican in the state has had something to say on this. I think egregiously for Abbott, he has been suggesting that this is spreading COVID in the state. This is, of course, the governor who lifted a mask mandate,
just because it was time. They said it was time to open up, and we're getting close to the primary filing deadline, and it was time to remove the mask mandate. So
but I think that I've been seeing a lot of pushback from people like Julian Castro, Representative Veronica Escobar. Representative Escobar, I think, has been very, very vocal about this, especially as the national media has, tried to sort of parachute in. And this tends to happen. They'll come in and they won't sort of understand sort of the nuances of border communities. And they'll kind of repeat a lot of talking points. Like I just saw a Politico article that was quoting Stephen Miller about the border. For folks who don't remember, Stephen Miller was the sort of the chief architect of child separation and one of the most.
I hope people have forgotten about him already.
I'd like to forget about him. Shockingly, he's only like 34 years old too. That's a whole other topic. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, this has been, I think a story that, we're no longer in the Trump administration. So I think for the media, you constantly have to find new stories to elevate. And I think this is one. And which is not to say that, there are, people who, they've come to this country because of some very devastating circumstances. So if you hear the stories of people and why they maybe sent a child, from Guatemala or El Salvador up here, it is truly because, there are terrible things that have happened. and this is really the only way that they see forward. So I think that also is something important to keep in mind, that this isn't,
Yeah. I mean, they're really two different things, right? There's like the people who are seeking asylum, which are people who are like, yeah, like you're saying, like risking their life. This isn't a game. This isn't fun. This isn't just like, oh, let's see if you can do better in America. I mean, this is like awful when you see the pictures, the conditions these people like traveled across. I can't even imagine. But those people are technically, it is legal to apply for asylum, and then the other group, a lot of them are migrant workers who come for seasonal work and things like that have always been a huge part of the Texas economy. And of course, they've been treated like, very poorly because of their immigration status, and it makes it very easy for them to be taken advantage of, which is a huge, really, to me, the biggest problem with the immigration system. Um, but but yeah, I mean, the idea of just turning no humanity towards these people at all, um, is unbelievable, and really the most destructive thing, because when you I even saw, there's a guy you may be familiar with him, named Brandon Darby, who is a writer for, I want to say it was Breitbart, Texas, which is not something I would normally commonly quote, but he always talks about the border in a very different way than typical conservatives talk about it. And he made a point on Twitter the other day. Actually, I had to retweet him just because I was like, yeah, it's nice to hear somebody basically say that. But, he was making the point of like, people complain about foreign aid, but he was just saying, like, when we give foreign aid to these countries, it's to help them build their economies there, so they don't, there's some stability and infrastructure, so that they don't feel like they have to risk their life to try to come to America just to live a decent life. And nobody wants to go to another country where they're going to be treated like a second class citizen. So it's out of desperation, and we have to understand the best way to really address and get out of these situations. And we're not doing it at the state level. We definitely don't have the help that we need.
No, but we will monitor, and we'll see what Cruz and Cornyn have to say, and we will hold them accountable, because I have a bad feeling that there's going to be some really odious things they're going to say.
Yeah, we can guarantee that. Well, I think it's time to sort of end on a high note. You made a really good point, to say that it's really great news to hear that, starting on Monday, all Texans, essentially adults over the age of 16, will be eligible for a vaccine. And I watched your county judge, Judge Clay Jenkins of Dallas County, basically every day tweeting how many vaccines are left at the end of the day, and it's basically encouraging people, hey, if you can get here in the next hour, we probably have a vaccine for you. So I really like to see, local politicians really driving those numbers up as fast as possible, because we've been really behind other states in getting the shots in arms.
Yeah, we've been behind other states, and like I was kind of waiting to see if we would have, this state where all adults would be eligible. I think Arizona, beat us a little bit to that, and so did some other states. But no, this is very exciting, and I think, we all sort of want to put this chapter behind us. And it has been very devastating. Nearly 50,000 Texans have died from COVID-19. There's been, so many businesses that have been impacted. I think for all of us, the last couple of weeks, we've kind of tallied like a full year pretty much, in this new reality. And this is sort of, I think, a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, and it is very exciting. And, hopefully, we will reach a point where, going to a restaurant or a movie or, whatever folks like to do, we're like, that is maybe in sight.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I do miss going to the movies. Me and my wife really like the Alamo Draft House, and we've been really sad that we can't go. But
yeah,
they're
I
gonna be back.
I miss going to the movies too.
Yeah, I can't wait. That's really going to be one of my favorite things. Okay, well, awesome. Well, thanks again. Folks out there, for listening. Really appreciate it. All of our patrons out there who get this first, really appreciate the investment that you make in Texas Signal, so we can keep doing what we do. And, please find us on Twitter at Texas Signal. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're all over. We're on TikTok. Yes, thank you. I always forget TikTok, and my wife always actually sends me TikToks all the time, and I forget to go check them. So I will actually have to remember. I'm an old, so I don't do things like TikTok. But anyway, if you're on it, we're there. We have younger, hipper, cooler people that are running that program for us. So don't worry about me. But anyway, all right. Thanks. Well, until next week. It's great. There we go.
Bye, guys.